beloved child. The greatest things in your life do not arrive with loud explosions, but begin with a sound so small you almost overlook it. You have grown accustomed to what is grand, to events that overturn your world, to voices that speak loudly. So much so that a gentle knock on the door of your heart seems unworthy of attention. Yet my grace rarely comes like thunder. It comes as a light tapping on an old wooden door that has been closed many times, yet is still patiently touched by me. In the quiet house of the soul, especially in the late afternoon when all noise begins to fade, you can hear that soft sound, like a fingertip brushing against wood, neither forcing nor striking. It is not the sound of judgment, but of a love strong enough to knock, yet gentle enough to wait. Grace does not enter by bringing you to your knees. It enters by inviting you. Grace does not begin with thunder. It begins with a small knock on the door of your heart. As long as there is a small, silent place within you, that knock will echo there like a reminder that you have not been forgotten. The question is not whether I knock, but whether you are still listening or have grown used to leaving that door untouched. In moments of solitude, when you lie still on your bed while your mind continues to whirl, you have sometimes felt a strange sense that something is calling you. It does not feel like a worrisome thought, nor like a voice of reproach, but like a very soft, very deep invitation, one that uses no words, yet touches the innermost part of you. That is when I stand at the door and knock. Just as it is written, I do not break the door, I wait for the one inside to choose. That knock may come through a seemingly casual sentence, a kind look, a song, or a nameless sadness that suddenly makes you pause and think of something greater than yourself. It may come in the middle of laughter, when you suddenly realize you are not truly joyful. It may come in the midst of success, when a voice inside you quietly asks, "And what happens after this?" Grace continues to gently touch the surface of the heart, not to force you to open, but to remind you that the door has not been abandoned. The more you ignore it, the harder it becomes to notice, not because I grow weary, but because your heart grows accustomed to neglect. There are souls so used to ignoring that knock that they no longer recognize what they are refusing. They live inside the house yet never open the door. They hear the sound but pretend they do not hear. They feel a slight pull within, but immediately turn up the music, bury themselves in work, or talk endlessly so they do not have to face silence. That silence is not harmless, because every time you tell yourself later, another layer of dust settles on the doorknob. Every time you choose not to respond, another patch of rust forms on the hinges, and eventually, the knocking of grace remains the same, but the heart grows heavy, no longer sensitive as it once was. Hell does not begin with a sudden flame bursting forth. It begins with a heart becoming accustomed to my absence, comfortable with not stepping out, not opening, not answering. When silence becomes habit, distance becomes normal, and separation becomes what the soul calls living. In that place, you lose the deepest part of yourself without hearing even a sound of collapse. Yet as long as you still breathe, the knocking of grace has not ceased. I do not grow discouraged because of the times you ignored me. I do not give up because of the seasons you turned away. I do not grow resentful because of the days you treated me as though I did not exist. I knock not to prove my power, but to keep you aware that someone still waits at your door. In the nights when you cannot sleep, in the moments when you sigh and no one understands, in the hours when you feel lost among everything you once dreamed of. It is then that the knock becomes louder. You think you are merely tired, merely stressed, merely weak. But beneath all of that, your soul is longing to hear a voice that knows its name. I knock so you may know that you are still called by name, still cherished, still loved even when you feel unworthy. Every knock is an affirmation, I am still here, still turned toward you. What I hope for from you is not a grand response, not a magnificent promise, but a very simple action to walk toward that door from within. When you begin to admit that someone is knocking, you have already broken through the silence surrounding your heart. When you dare to say to yourself, "Perhaps you are calling me," you have cracked the wall of numbness. When you whisper, even faintly, "If you truly are there, please do not abandon me," your hand has already touched the doorknob. Grace does not demand that you do everything right at once. It only asks that you stop remaining silent. Do not think the door is too old to open, for I know how to turn every rusted hinge. Do not think the room inside is too messy for me to enter, for I do not come to criticize your arrangement. I come to help you rearrange it. The knock of grace rarely arrives through overwhelming supernatural moments, but often slips quietly into life through the smallest things you easily overlook. It may come through a passage of scripture you once read somewhere and forgot. Yet one day it suddenly resounds clearly in your mind when you are weary. It may be an old memory, like afternoon sunlight streaming through a childhood window when you once felt loved without having to earn it. It may arise from a simple restlessness. Why do I still feel something missing? Even when everything seems fine, grace does not shout to force you to hear. It pulls gently, like a hand resting on your shoulder just enough for you to know something is reaching toward you. There are days when you simply close your eyes on the bus, between engine noise and the shuffling of crowds, and a question appears in your heart that no one taught you. Where am I even going? It is not a meaningless thought, it is a very small knock, like a reminder that you may be living but have not yet touched the source of life. There are moments when you are eating a simple dinner and the sound of a spoon brushing against a bowl suddenly reminds you of someone who once shared such ordinary meals with you. Not to make you grieve, but to soften your heart just long enough for me to enter. Grace may arrive through moments that seem disconnected, a conversation with a stranger at a cafe who speaks the exact words you have been thinking, a slip of paper falling from an old notebook containing something you once wrote to yourself, or a line in scripture you read when you were young that now touches your soul in a completely different way. Sometimes you are simply walking, and you see a faded leaf fall from a branch, and an inexplicable quietness blooms within you. That is grace, not loud, not ostentatious, coming through the smallest details of everyday life, yet causing your heart to pause just long enough to remember that I am still watching you. The quiet minutes in between your hurried tasks are often where that knocking can be heard most clearly. You might be working late, with a bright white screen and tired eyes, and in the middle of a long document your heart suddenly sinks. It is not because you are weak, but because the soul is trying to push open a door you have not yet unlocked. Or you may be standing in the bathroom, toothbrush still in hand, water running into the sink, and suddenly you feel a nameless emptiness. That is not despair. It is a reminder that you have forgotten to answer a knock that has been there for a long time. I do not need complicated rituals to speak to you. I only need a moment when your heart is not drowned out by noise. In that stillness, I do not condemn you. I only want you to know that peace has never disappeared. You have simply walked too far from where it was placed. There are those who wait for signs from heaven, a miracle, a dream, a beam of light piercing the clouds. But grace does not come to astonish you. It comes so that you may recognize it. A very ordinary piece of advice from a friend you never thought would understand you. A child's sentence that makes you pause longer than you expected. Or the heaviness in your chest when you look in the mirror and no longer recognize your own eyes. All of these are ways I knock on the door. Grace does not seek to convince with arguments. It touches the soul with gentleness. If you wait only for great events, you will miss the small signs. When these small signs are in fact the deepest invitations. I do not knock on the walls of your house. I knock on the door in the place you still assume is silent. When you learn to recognize these ordinary knocks, You will understand that grace is not looking for a stage to display its power, but a place where it can enter into love. I choose the details of your everyday life, not to confuse you, but to let you know that I am present in all things, in your breath, in your steps, in that 1 second when you lift your eyes to the sky without knowing why, when you say, "It's just a feeling." You unintentionally silence the knocking. When you say, "Everyone feels this way," you add another lock to the door. But when you pause long enough to ask, "Is someone calling me?" you have already begun to hear more clearly. Grace is not a strong wind blowing the door wide open. It is a gentle rhythm that reminds your soul that someone is waiting outside. Grace does not impose itself on you like a hand yanking you away from the edge of the abyss. It comes like a person standing at your door with a gentle gaze, waiting for you to be willing to open. I do not shove the door. Do not break the lock. Do not roar to force your attention. I knock softly, because I honor your heart more than the urgency of the world. Freedom is the gift I gave you from the beginning, and grace does not come to take it away. Grace is an invitation to sit beside me, not a shout demanding you kneel. Even though I know your path and see the turnings that lead to collapse, I still let you choose, because coerced love can only become empty submission. When grace reaches you, it lays a hand on your heart, not on your throat. It lets your soul decide when to stop, to turn around, and to come home. There are times when you wish I would intervene with force, that I would stop you, pull you away from dangerous choices. But understand this, what is forced will never give birth to love. If I made it impossible for you to be wrong, you would never know what it means to choose what is right. If I shielded you from every wound, you would never learn the value of peace. I stand at the door and knock, but you are the one who turns the handle. I may see a path of light stretching out ahead, yet I do not force you onto it. Because faith does not grow in an iron cage. It sprouts from soil that is allowed to choose. I do not create souls that only know how to fear punishment. I create souls that learn to love the truth. That is why grace does not operate like a penalty. It operates like an opportunity many times, again and again, tender and patient. Even when you turn your back, I do not chase you with threats. I let you go, like the father who watches his son demand his inheritance and leave for a distant country. That father does not tie his son's feet, does not warn him with a whip, does not lock the gate. He lets him go. Because true love cannot hold a person by force. But when the son returns, tired, ragged, and broken, the door of the house is still wide open. So it is with me. I let you try. I let you fall on your own. I let you discover that my absence is not freedom, but emptiness. I do not need to take away your freedom in order to protect you from pain. I need to protect your heart from believing that pain is all you deserve. And this is precisely why I knock, not to invade, but to remind you that I am ready to wait for your return. Inner freedom is not the feeling that I can do whatever I want. It is the ability to listen to what is right, even when what is wrong is attractive. The world may tell you that freedom is the right to choose without thinking, to live by instinct, to cast aside every restraint. But ask yourself this: if you must run from your emotions, hide your fears, cling to noise to avoid silence, is that freedom or merely a prison without visible bars? Grace does not come to strip away those options, but to open a new one that is not built on fear, but on inner peace. I do not force you to open the door. I simply stand there, so your heart may know there is a place in this world where you are not required to pretend to be strong. You may think that if I truly loved you, I would make you listen, make you believe, make you return immediately. But love is not control. When I knock on your door, It is evidence that I respect you enough not to cross the boundary of your freedom. Darkness may exploit fear to manipulate you, but light guides you only through trust. If you say no, I do not break the door down, because I know that one day you will understand that this no belonged to fear, not to your soul. And when that day comes, I will still be there. No resentment, no shaming, no punishment. Grace does not say, you must. It only says, you may. It does not say, I need you. It says, you are loved. Hell does not begin with fire or screams. It begins with a dangerous familiarity with emptiness. It does not appear when someone commits a great sin, but when the heart stops trembling before the light, when the soul no longer knows how to long for my presence. People often think of hell as a distant place, a separate realm from this present life. But in the deepest reality, it is an inner condition, a place where the heart no longer responds to my voice, where light keeps knocking and no one listens, where the invitation of love is treated like meaningless wind. Hell begins when the soul forgets it has a home, and gradually starts to treat my absence as normal. In that familiarity, you do not feel immediate pain, you only feel emptiness. And then you begin to call that emptiness normal. There are people who live their whole lives in that state without realizing it. They still laugh, still work, still chase after goals. But deep inside there is a dark patch that no longer reflects light. At first, they feel uneasy when they hear about me, feel disturbed before holiness, feel unsettled by gentle reminders. But slowly, as eyes adjust to the dark, that uneasiness disappears, not because they have been healed, but because they have grown numb. That numbness is the soul's final alarm. It is saying that you have lost the ability to recognize what is holy. Like a sick person who no longer feels pain, the quietness of that absence is not a sign of health, but a warning that life is slipping away from the body without their awareness. There are times when I create a silence so you may return, but for hearts that have already shut themselves, that silence becomes a testimony of absence. They no longer ask where I am, no longer seek my hand, no longer desire my guidance. They are no longer angry with me, no longer resent me. They simply no longer think of me. That is the most frightening moment in a spiritual journey, when you no longer feel pain from being far from me, when you no longer feel loss even though the light has departed from you. That condition is not safety, it is silent destruction. For a soul that still knows how to hurt when it is lost still has a chance to return. But a soul that has ceased to ache has already grown accustomed to the abyss. Hell does not need to attack you. It only needs you to stop responding to my call. It does not need flames to burn you. It only needs time for your heart to grow cold. It does not need chains to bind your soul. It only needs you to stop longing for the freedom I give. People often ask why I do not shake heaven and earth to pull them back. I could do that. But when you no longer know how to recognize me, every sign will simply seem like another natural occurrence that appears and fades. The dryness within you does not frighten you, because you mistake it for normalcy. You forget that you once knew peace, once knew spiritual joy, once felt your heart tremble when you heard me call. When that memory disappears, the soul begins to die quietly. So, what makes hell in this life? Not the punishment I inflict, but the consequence of slowly drifting away from the source of life, like a drained lake with no sound of waves, like a dead forest with no birdsong. A soul that loses its ability to long is a soul that has stepped into darkness without realizing it. I did not create you to live in that darkness, but I will not tear your soul out of it by force. Grace knocks, but you must open. My word resounds, but you must listen. My presence covers your life, but you must choose to face it. Hell is not when I abandon you. It is when you no longer know how to seek me. Hell never begins with a catastrophe big enough to shatter the soul. It begins with very small choices that seem harmless, but slowly blur the spiritual senses within you. One time you ignore a gentle reminder, then one time you postpone prayer, then one night you choose noise over stillness, and gradually the heart stops recognizing me. These choices do not scream like alarms, they simply retreat the light a little further, like curtains being drawn inch by inch without your notice, until darkness fills the room. People imagine hell as a dramatic event, but in the life of the soul, it enters through familiarity, becoming familiar with, not listening to me, familiar with explaining everything by your own reasoning, familiar with depending on yourself and treating my presence as a luxury. When that familiarity takes root, you will no longer see anything wrong, and that is precisely when danger begins. Those small choices are like water leaking beneath the floor. At first the surface remains dry, the walls remain intact, and you think there is no danger. But time is the silent accomplice. A tiny crack becomes the passage for mold, for decay, for damage you only notice when everything collapses. A soul is the same every compromise, every delay, every "it's no big deal" becomes a drop that leads to a flood. Hell does not need to roar to claim space. It only needs your heart to stop recognizing my presence. Jesus spoke to those who believed they were wise enough to stand without him. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. Those words were not a threat, but a warning for hearts that have lost sensitivity to what is holy. Do not think that drifting away from me only happens when you commit a grave sin. It often begins with a confident decision, I can handle this on my own. You refuse my guidance not because you rebel, but because you believe you are fine. The world teaches you that maturity means needing no one. But faith teaches that maturity is knowing you need me. A person may never speak a word against me, and still live as though I do not exist. In that moment, you have laid the foundation of hell not through declarations, but through forgetfulness. As Proverbs 1:4-1-2 says, there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. That death is not the end of life, but a spiritual death, a heart that no longer trembles before the light. This condition does not appear instantly. It is like a sapling whose roots do not grow deep into the soil, seeking only surface moisture. While the rain lasts, the tree remains green, but when the sun lingers, it withers without understanding why. You may pray once, read scripture for a week, walk with zeal in one season of your life, and gradually tell yourself that perhaps you no longer need to be as close to me as before. And you think, just this once. But those just once moments are the links that form a quiet chain of betrayal. Hell does not arrive through a terrifying nightfall. It arrives when the light has been forgotten long enough that you no longer distinguish what is bright and what is dark. When you lose your awareness of me, the first thing you lose is not faith, it is peace. That unease begins softly, like a faint noise in your home at night that you pretend not to hear. But then it becomes a vague heaviness, and you try to fill it with things easy to reach: work, relationships, praise, accomplishments, the illusion of success. When those are not enough, you increase the dosage: more noise, more distraction, more pursuit. Yet the more you add, the more hollow you feel. I did not take your peace from you. You traded it for things that cannot feed the soul. These choices do not awaken you with sharp pain, they slowly numb you. And in that numbness, hell is born quietly. Absence never begins from my side. I do not leave. Do not fall silent to abandon you. Do not withdraw my hand out of frustration toward your slowness. What makes you feel that I am far away is the habit of refusing the moments when I knock. At first it is only a small step back. Today you are too tired to speak with me. Tomorrow you are too busy to listen. Then another day you think perhaps your problems do not require me. The door does not slam shut in a single instant. It closes slowly, gently, like nighttime sliding into a house when no one is paying attention. When you become accustomed to the absence, the soul slowly stops searching for the sacred signals. Not because the signals have vanished, but because you have learned to look right through them as one looks through twilight without noticing its beauty. There are people who beg me to speak louder, clearer, stronger, yet they are the ones who block their ears with the noise of the world. My knocking does not thunder like a hammer against a wall. It is the soft tapping on wooden doors, enough for a sensitive heart to recognize, but not enough to drown out the noise you insist on keeping. I do not compete with noise. Because competition is the language of the world, I simply wait. Because waiting is the language of love. And in that waiting, you may mistake me for having departed. But the silence you feel is not abandonment, it is an invitation. A gentle reminder that the heart can only hear me when it is willing to release what is holding it captive. There was a time when you thought you had lost your faith, but I did not withdraw the light I had given. It was you who turned your face away from it. You could no longer recognize my guidance, not because the guidance had ended, but because you had grown accustomed to consulting your fears, your ego, and the voices of people whose hearts were not anchored in me. The soul is like a garden if it is not watered by my word. It does not burst apart in storms, it simply withers in the sun. People fear the lightning strikes that shatter peace. But hell does not approach through fire. It arrives through persistent dryness, where petals fall one by one until nothing remains but a bare trunk. And its owner says, "This is normal." When a soul comes to regard dryness as normal, that is the deepest sign of absence. And you will come to understand this. I have never forced the heart to open its doors. I come. I knock. I wait. Because love does not invade by violence. But the freedom I grant is also the path through which you can build distance. One day, you look around and find yourself alone among the things that once filled you with excitement. Laughter turns into exhaustion. Success becomes pressure. And excitement reveals itself to be only distraction. You will ask, "Have you abandoned me?" But the answer lies within the very memories you refuse to revisit. Every moment when you felt your steps falter. Every moment when you knew you were leaving the light. Every moment I knocked softly. You chose silence. When silence becomes reflex, the heart assumes it is no longer being called. But the truth is that the calling never ceased. Only the listener stopped responding. My absence is not a storm blocking the road, but the empty space that forms when the heart no longer opens. When I knock, you may believe I have gone away, but in reality, I am standing right there, waiting for you to break the silence you yourself have created. A soul that turns its face away does not make me a stranger, but it renders itself unable to recognize the love that stands beside it. And when it finally admits that darkness did not defeat it, but that it compromised with darkness, that is the moment the door can open again. In that returning light, you will understand I have never abandoned you. Only your heart has learned to live without answering. Neglect is not a fist striking the door I knock upon, but a distracted glance toward something else when the knocking sounds. Not everyone who turns their back is opposing me. Most simply do not respond. The silence of the soul does not wear the face of rebellion, but of busyness, of overcrowded priorities that push grace's knock into the distance. You do not need to declare that you reject me in order to walk away from me. All it takes is many moments of tomorrow. Many moments of, "It's fine." Many moments of, "I'll come back later." Those words slowly train the soul to live without me. A closed door is not always locked. Sometimes it is simply left long enough for dust to cover the handle. And when you no longer touch it, you begin to believe that no one is standing outside. There are seasons in your life without storms, without pain strong enough to bring you to your knees, without events powerful enough to force you to look inward. You pass through each day with repeated tasks, fragmented conversations, simple desires. You imagine that this peace comes from everything being under your control, but in truth the soul is asleep, no longer listening, no longer seeking. When grace knocks, you neither become angry nor fearful, you simply do not respond. That silence is like a field dried after the rainy season, still vast, still calm, but barren of life. No one destroyed it, no one trampled it, no one plowed it. It was simply left alone, and left alone long enough, any soil becomes hostile to the seeds planted within it. I see you in those moments when you play a song to drown your loneliness instead of speaking with me, when you scroll through your screen to soothe the mind instead of resting on my word, when you let meals, appointments, and messages fill the silence that should have been reserved for me. No one calls that sin. No one says you have committed a great wrong. You are simply living as usual. But in that usual, you trade the sacred dialogue for sounds that will never listen to you. And when I knock not to invade, but to remind you that there is a space for you, in my heart you dismiss it as an echo of your own thoughts or coincidence. The silence does not arise from resistance, but from gradually losing the ability to recognize the one standing at the door. Sometimes I allow you to encounter an old memory, a prayer that once made you tremble, a moment of peace that once made you weep, a person who once reminded you of my love, not to force you into regret, but to let your heart remember that it once knew how to answer. But if you have lived too long in silence, that memory passes like a breeze across the surface of a lake, creating ripples for a moment and disappearing. The soul is not defeated by darkness, it simply loses the habit of turning toward the light. And when it no longer looks toward the light, everything before its eyes becomes normal. Even if that normality is draining its life from within, silence does not end in the pounding of fists upon the door, but in the absence of any door left to knock upon. I am not angry when you are silent. I do not withdraw my hand when you do not answer. I only feel sorrow, because I know that this silence gives you nothing you are truly searching for. You think silence protects you from responsibility, from change, from difficult questions. But silence does not protect you. It only makes you gradually lose the ability to hear my voice. When a heart ceases to tremble before truth, it becomes guided by other voices, the voices of urgency, of worry, of desire, of empty promises. These voices never knock, they barge in, occupy space, fill the room, and by the time you realize you are exhausted, there is nowhere left to take shelter. Grace does not demand a shout in return, it needs only a whisper. But prolonged silence turns a whisper into a distant noise. Many souls do not resist me, they simply live long enough in silence for the heart to forget that it once knew how to respond. When that happens, what you have lost is not me, it is the very ability to recognize me, and that is the threshold where wandering begins. When silence becomes habit, the soul no longer looks upward to ask me where to go, it begins to look inward to find direction. It treats emotion as a compass, excitement as a sign to move forward, sadness as a reason to turn back. Emotions are waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes violent, but waves never know the direction of the shore. When you give the entire navigation of your life to what is constantly shifting, you begin to walk paths not because they are true, but because they feel right. You love things simply because they are visible before you, not because they have a future. You fear paths simply because they require courage, not because they are wrong. And when the waves change, when emotion ebbs, leaving behind an empty shore. You blame the world for changing on you, never realizing that it was the soul who abandoned its anchor. A heart that has lost the habit of listening to me begins to believe that passing feelings are sacred guidance. On a sunny day, you decide to pursue a dream because joy swells in your chest. On a rainy day, you abandon that dream because fear rises in your mind. And then you say, "This world is so harsh." But the harshness does not begin with the world. It begins with a soul that has placed itself in the storm without carrying a lamp. When my light is forgotten, the soul lives by faint signals, flattery, praise, recognition. You start to think that compliments prove you are walking in the right direction. But those compliments are only wind. If your heart is a sail that has never looked up to see the North Star, the wind will carry you wherever it wishes. And when you drift to a cold and barren shore, you will believe the sea has betrayed you. There are souls who believe that not reacting is safety. They live by the rule. I do whatever I feel like doing. They do not resist evil, they simply drift with it. They do not choose wrong. They simply do not choose what is right. But the current does not ask whether you can swim, it simply carries you away. If you are silent before my guidance, you are accepting another voice as captain, the anxiety that comes at midnight, the loneliness that presses on the mind, the thrill of the moment when others are impressed. These things do not intend to rule you, but they will do so when you hand them the power to decide. Then, when you stumble, you will say, "Why is my life like this?" You will blame circumstances, other people, time, fate. But deep within the soul, the true cause is a prolonged silence. That silence does not drive me away from you. It simply convinces the soul that it can manage on its own. The most immature are not those who make great mistakes, but those who believe they do not need direction. Like a driver at night who turns off the headlights to get used to the darkness and is stunned when an accident occurs. The accident does not happen because the world has turned against them. It happens because they decided not to use the very tool that would keep them safe. Emotions are not the enemy, but when the soul turns them into a compass, every shift of the wind becomes a life or death decision. You will see such people everywhere. They change their goals because of a passing emotion. They leave relationships because of a passing anger. They quit in the middle of the journey because of a single weary morning. And then they say, "I tried, but life never gave me a chance." It is not that opportunity was taken away. They simply never dared to stand firmer than the waves. When the soul no longer listens to me, it begins to mistake the first gust of wind for destiny, the first wave for a calling, and the first storm for a sign to turn back. But wind is only wind. Waves are only waves. And the storm, it is only a test to see whether you still remember the light. A silent heart is not a neutral heart. It will soon learn to weep over what is not worth grieving, to fear what is not real, to thrill over what is empty. And with every repetition of this, it becomes more convinced that the world is the oppressor, that life is a battlefield, that everyone is an enemy. But in truth, only one thing has changed. The soul is no longer willing to hear me. Not listening does not make you less guilty, it only makes you more easily led. Not answering does not make you harmless, it makes you directionless. And directionlessness, when it lasts long enough, will harden into destiny, not because I wrote it that way, but because you stayed silent while I was trying to save you from waves you yourself could not see. There are times when you believe storms come because fate is too cruel to you. But in reality, the storm is only the sound of the wind outside, while your heart has already abandoned the shelter within. When the soul is exhausted, it starts chasing intense sensations just to prove to itself that it is still alive, and then uses those fluctuations as its guiding star. You call joy freedom, sadness fate, excitement, hope, and disappointment, failure. But all of these are merely fleeting reactions of a mind wandering in the rain, unaware that it has stepped out from under the eaves. Emotion can be a companion, but it is not a driver. It may point in a direction for a moment, but it has no map that leads you home. If you remain in that state too long, you will begin to interpret everything that happens as an attack. When people do not understand you, you will believe the whole world has turned its back. When plans fall apart, you will think you have been abandoned. When a door closes, you will see it as punishment. But storms do not come to destroy you. They simply reveal the ground on which you are standing. If your heart is anchored to the light, thunder is only sound. But if you have unfastened the cord that ties you to that source of light, the wind will become a monster, clouds will become threats, and every small noise will seem like a warning that the world is against you. Then one day, you will look at the darkness in front of you and wonder why it is growing. You will think it is attacking, that it is creeping into you bit by bit. But darkness has no claws. It does not know how to open doors, break down walls, or shatter glass. It only enters when the light is no longer being kept nearby you. Just as damp seeps through a wall because of a small crack left unattended, darkness seeps in, not because it is strong, but because you believed you could stand firm without the lamp you once leaned on. You do not lose because of the storm. You lose because you forgot to check the roof before the rain came. A soul that has separated itself from the light does not collapse at once. It retreats step by step like a young tree uprooted from the soil. It is not the wind that breaks it, but the lack of deep roots. It is not life that drains you, but the fact that you have paused in drinking from the only source that can give life. A small scratch is not dangerous, but if you leave it unattended, infection will form and spread. In the same way, a single moment of silence before the knock of grace will not kill the soul, but silence repeated again and again will teach the heart to confidently believe that it no longer needs to open the door. Therefore, do not be quick to hate the darkness. It is not the enemy. It is merely the reflection of the empty space growing inside you. The true enemy is becoming comfortable with that emptiness the moment you look at yourself and think, maybe I do not need heaven. That is when storms stop being tests and become verdicts you sign against yourself. And if you continue on in that inertia, you will one day wake up and no longer recognize that you have started living like a room without windows. There are moments when the knock of grace does not arrive as a major event, but only as a very gentle pause in the rhythm of everyday life, a deep breath in the middle of work, a moment when your eyes drift toward a distant sky, a question that suddenly surfaces from a place whose source you cannot name. But instead of listening, you rush to find something else to do. You unlock your phone, scroll through another video, reply to a message, type a few lines of work, and then tell yourself that you do not have time to think about such things. Silence before the knock is not merely failing to answer. It is a quiet decision that anything else can stand in place of truly facing the call rising from the depths of your soul. You do not cover your ears with your hands. You cover them with busyness. Busyness is not your enemy. It only becomes armor when you use it to avoid diving within. You fear that if you pause, you will face something you do not want to see, an unresolved wound, a question of meaning, an old injury whose name you have not spoken in a long time. So you take on one more task, open one more tab, embrace one more project, as though movement could replace peace. But movement does not mean moving forward. In the world, people call it productivity. In the soul, it is escape. You are not running from work, you are running from the stillness that invites you to step in. Then one day, you look back and realize you no longer remember when the knocking disappeared. It was once as clear as the light tap of knuckles on wood in a quiet afternoon. but you let other sounds drown it out, the noise of schedules, the expectations of others, the weight of responsibility, the fear of falling behind. Grace has never vanished, it simply waits at the door, asking to be noticed. Meanwhile, your soul learns to survive on reaction, doing, rushing, responding, coping. A busy heart may at times believe it is fine, but that fine is like a house so full of objects that there is no space to breathe. Silence before the knocking is not ignorance, it is the deliberate choice to trade truth for convenience. The danger is not that you do not answer, it is that you begin to believe you no longer need to answer. When busyness becomes normal, you are not only avoiding, you are constructing invisible fences around yourself. The people sent to remind you, you treat as an inconvenience. The moments that interrupt your pace, you call bad luck. The situations that confuse you, you label as failure. Yet behind it all remains a single, constant, every time you push away that invitation. You are not merely refusing an opportunity, you are training your heart to believe that the presence of light is non-essential. That is the backward step the soul often takes without realizing it. And when that continues, you start to think silence is safer than answering. Because if you answer, you must admit you need healing. If you answer, you must dare to look at what you have put aside. If you answer, you must accept that you may have gone the wrong direction. You choose busyness because busyness does not ask you to change. But remember, silence does not make the knocking disappear. It merely pushes the threshold farther and farther away until your heart believes no one was standing outside in the first place. There is something you rarely notice: the soul has a skin of its own. Every time you ignore the knocking, every time you dismiss the subtle stirring inside, a thin, nearly invisible layer covers the place that was once sensitive. At first you still feel it, like hands just beginning to adapt to a shovel. Still tender, still aching, but if you keep digging day after day, the skin hardens. People call it callous, an unavoidable consequence of resisting constant friction. The soul is the same. If you keep resisting grace's knocking, the sacred sensitivity within begins to harden. Not because I withdraw, but because you have trained your heart to no longer respond to me. In the early days, just a brief passage of scripture, a sincere piece of advice, or an inexplicable sense of peace was enough to make you slow down. You could feel something greater than yourself calling your name. But if you continually ignore it, the soul adjusts to protect itself from having to face that call. Like the laborer who no longer feels pain where his hand has hardened against the tool. You will no longer feel the sting where I touch you. That silence is not peace. It is the defense mechanism of a soul accustomed to not responding. And when you begin to lose the original sensitivity, you mistake it for maturity. Maybe I've become stronger, less emotional. But in truth, you have only become less able to feel the call. The longer silence endures, the more you learn to live without light. A flower in the desert can survive without rain for a while, but it will dry out. Not because it was attacked, but because water has not touched its roots in too long. The soul is the same. No one comes to break you. No one comes to steal you away from me. But every time you dismiss a gentle reminder, every time you belittle a moment of quiet, every time you treat a heavy heart as normal, your soul turns from a garden into hardened ground. When the soil is dry, the seed cannot sprout, not because the seed is flawed, but because the environment can no longer receive life. In that state, you begin to judge light by emotion. If you feel warmth, you draw near. If you feel cold, you turn away. If it seems convenient, you open your heart. If it feels inconvenient, you shut the door, and then you convince yourself that such choices are wisdom of the heart. But a hardened soul can no longer distinguish between a knock and a gust of wind. It categorizes every touch as disturbance. Honest counsel becomes criticism. A quiet moment becomes boredom. An opportunity to heal becomes a threat. Not because the world has changed, but because the senses within have been worn down for too long. In such a condition, you can witness a miracle and call it luck. You can hear a warning and call it negativity. You can see a door open and call it coincidence. And then you ask, why do I no longer hear your voice, but the knocking is the same? The door is the same. The presence is the same. Only your heart has lost the tenderness to feel it. Callus does not ache, but it also cannot feel the touch. And when the soul becomes like that, it is not because it has grown stronger, it is because it has forgotten how to feel pain when far from the source of life. There is a silence you think is harmless when you choose it. You do not rage. You do not rebel. You do not deny me openly. You simply do not respond. But silence is not a harmless void. It begins as a thin mist, then becomes a fog that clouds your sight, and finally becomes a wall without windows. You think you only need a few days without prayer, a few moments ignoring the gentle prompt, a few periods of busyness to avoid facing the knocking of grace. But those very moments of just a little longer are shaping the architecture of your soul. It is not unconscious. You are constructing a house I am no longer allowed to enter. Not because I wish to leave, but because you have designed every doorway to face away from me. Silence is like a boat tied loosely to the shore. It does not drift violently. It moves away inch by inch with each gentle wave. One day you look up and the boat is already far from shore beyond reach. You never notice the exact moment it separated, because drifting is never loud. It is the long result of unattended neglect. The soul is the same. Not because you resist me do I become a stranger, but because the times you did not respond have made light feel rare, while emptiness becomes the default state. And when that persists, you do not simply grow used to darkness, you begin to treat light as something sudden, puzzling, even bothersome. There are souls who once heard me clearly. They needed no sermons, no pressure. Even a gentle breeze passing through their thoughts was enough to make them pause. But over time, they chose silence before the knock, then silence before reminders, then silence before the unease that comes from acting against conscience. They believed they were still the ones who knew the way, merely wandering for a short time. Yet a soul that remains silent for too long begins to lose the language of love. It no longer understands the invitation. It no longer feels pain when it walks away. It no longer remembers how to return, not because I am difficult to find, but because the heart has locked itself away from the ability to recognize me. Imagine a room once filled with light but left abandoned. At first there is only a thin layer of dust on the table. Then spider webs appear in the corner. Then mold creeps into the cracks. One day, the owner returns and finds everything strange, as if it had never belonged to them. Silence creates exactly that, not the erasure of me from your life, but the transformation of me into a stranger within your own soul. You still know I was once there, but you no longer know how to open the door to welcome me back. You see me through memory, not through relationship. And memory, if it is not nurtured, is no longer strong enough to save a falling soul. That is why silence is never neutral. It is like releasing the anchor from a ship. You do not feel its descent when it hits the seabed, but it holds you in a different position from where you think you stand. It keeps you drifting away from the light without sounding an alarm. One day, when you call on me, you will find you must shout loudly just to bridge the distance that years of silence have created. Not because I am far, but because you have allowed that distance to become the default language of your soul. There is a dangerous moment that most souls do not recognize, not when you rebel, not when you collapse in pain, but when you look at yourself and think, I'm still fine. even though it has been long since you last spoke to me. In that moment, you cannot see where the fracture began, because it is not a deep blade's cut, but a thread pulled gently day by day, until it snaps without a sound. You do not cry out. You do not collapse. You do not blame. You simply grow accustomed to silence, and that very familiarity slowly dissolves your awareness of me. Hell does not explode with drums. It begins with a whisper. It's fine. I'm okay. A person who stops conversing with me is like someone who once breathed deeply in fresh air and now only takes short breaths in a sealed room. At first, they still walk normally, still work, still laugh. But with time, the breath grows heavy, the chest tightens, the eyes blur and they do not know why. Lack of oxygen does not cause instant agony. It gradually changes how the body reacts until exhaustion becomes normal. Likewise, when the soul stops speaking, you do not die in a single day. You simply drop pieces of life bit by bit, until you forget that peace was once the natural breath of your being. Not every soul falls because of visible sin. Most fall because of comforting emptiness, busyness, success, praise, obligations. These can form a foundation so stable you no longer feel lacking in anything. But the greatest danger is not lack, it is no longer knowing that you lack. Like someone who has lost the sense of smell and can no longer detect smoke in a burning house. The soul that has lost the ability to sense me cannot see that it is drifting away. When you believe I'm still fine, your mind constructs a world in which I am optional, not essential, not urgent, like a night lamp you turn on when you want, turn off when you're busy, and set aside when you think your eyes are strong enough to navigate the darkness on their own. And then an event arrives. Others collapse under it, while you feel only emptiness. Not peace, but numbness. A living heart will ache when it is wounded, but a calloused heart will only fall silent before the cut. Many souls mistake numbness for strength. I don't feel pain anymore. I have matured. But the absence of pain is not a sign of resilience. It is the sign that the communication line has been severed. When you no longer speak with me, you no longer know how to read signals, no longer recognize invitations, no longer see the warnings I have placed along the road. You think you are still driving, when you have already left the map and wandered into unfamiliar lands where light is no longer considered necessary. Hell does not arise from rebellious souls, but from souls confident they do not need to return. You do not lie down and declare, I choose darkness. You simply stop turning your face toward the light. You choose silence instead of dialogue. Choose analysis instead of conversation. Choose self-management over openness. And day by day, your soul learns to function without me, like a child learning to live without its parents, only to one day realize it no longer remembers the way home. In the depths of it, hell is not screaming, it is silence so prolonged that you forget the sound of my voice. There is a discoloration that happens within the soul when you let silence linger too long, and it does not arrive with a loud explosion. You do not wake one morning suddenly cold-hearted. The change is like a screen whose vivid colors gradually fade. At first, only a slight dullness in the left corner, a patch of gray in the shadows, a few highlights no longer as vibrant as before. You attribute it to tired eyes, to lighting, to work, to life. But in truth, it is a sign that the heart is growing used to the twilight between absence and numbness. When you no longer speak with me, when you no longer open yourself to the gentle knock, you stop seeing goodness as light and begin to see it as just another shade of dullness. Not because goodness has changed, but because the eyes of the soul have slipped away from its true color. The soul once knew how to be moved by small things, the kindness of a stranger, a sincere thank you, the vulnerability of someone else. a single, unnoticed tear. But when the heart grows accustomed to my absence, such things become ordinary, even excessive, like someone who listens to music for too long amid noise until a clear and beautiful harmony sounds like meaningless echo. You begin to lose the ability to recognize melody. Goodness, once structured, deep, and warm, becomes nothing more than the collision of isolated notes. You see an act of love and assume it is strategy. You hear a kind word and consider it manipulation. You look at a quiet person and assume they are hiding schemes, not because the world has grown darker, but because the soul has been reshaped by a rhythm no longer belonging to the light. My absence does not only take away your sensitivity, it also makes your feelings fade. At first, you are only not as moved as before. Then you begin to feel nothing. And in the end, what should have made your heart tremble only leaves you confused, or even irritated. When someone is struggling, you no longer see an invitation to love, you only see inconvenience. When someone asks for forgiveness, you no longer see an opportunity for healing, you only see weakness. When a door opens, you no longer see a blessing, you only see responsibility. Like a wall covered in layer upon layer of paint, your heart begins to coat itself so it does not have to face anything. The problem is never no one loves you. The problem is that you have lived so long in the gray zone that your soul has forgotten the color of light when it comes. Then one day, you hear a moving story that makes others cry, and you remain silent. You see an act of sacrifice, but you do not see its beauty, you only see foolishness. You hear about grace, and instead of sensing it, you dissect it. You come into contact with what is sacred, and instead of opening your heart, you compare, like someone who once played the piano but abandoned it for too long. When they finally place their hands on the keys again, their fingers are stiff. Their ears hear the melody, but no longer recognize their own heartbeat in it. It is not because the music has disappeared, but because the mind has filed it away under noise instead of beautiful. The heart does the same thing. In my absence, it no longer understands what tenderness is, what an invitation is, what light is when it comes to embrace it. Absence is never just emptiness. It is a training process. If you are not in conversation with me, you are in conversation with something else: doubt, weariness, self-protection. And those teachers do not teach you how to love. They teach you how to shut the door. They teach you to believe that goodness is exploitation, kindness is weakness, gentleness is unrealistic. Hell does not need to burn the soul, it only needs to make you see every good thing as pointless. When goodness becomes just another shade of gray in your eyes, darkness does not need to attack, you have already disabled the light within yourself. When a house keeps its doors shut for many years, the first thing to disappear is not the light, but the sound. Inside there remain only the echo of one's own breath, the tired footsteps crossing empty rooms. At first, the one living there can still hear the soft knocking from outside, still feel warmth slipping through the cracks at dawn, still recognize my presence in the little details of daily life, a simple question of concern, a small opportunity, an unexplainable stirring of conscience. But as the heart grows accustomed to self-defense, you begin to lock up, not because you fear the darkness outside, but because you believe nothing good wants to come in anymore. I still approach that place, still lay my hand on the frame, still knock with patience. But the sound no longer reaches the soul, not because I am silent, but because loneliness has become the only sound you are willing to hear. There comes a day in many lives when a person looks out through the crack of a window and realizes the world is still turning, but they no longer have a part in it, not because life has cast them out, but because they have slowly withdrawn from every source of life, like a house gathering dust. layer by layer. Those doors are not locked by iron bolts, but by the thoughts. It's fine. It's not necessary. It doesn't fit me anymore. It's no longer important. These whispers are the true latches that keep grace from entering. I do not break doors. Do not burst in like an intruder. I honor the soul, even when that soul is suffocating itself. The stillness of hell is not a silence I create. It is the sound you create when you lock yourself inside your pride and exhaustion, insisting that you are still all right. When you keep the door locked for too long, you begin to forget the beautiful sounds that once came to you. You remember the knocking as a luxury that has vanished, like someone who once listened to music every afternoon, but when the room became choked with dust, decided that music had died, never realizing they themselves had put the instrument away in a dark corner. In the inner world, the same thing happens. You no longer distinguish which is my call, which is a passing thought, which is a signal inviting you to return. I have not moved away, but you have lived so long in an empty house that every signal from outside has turned into static. It is not that my love has grown weaker, it is that your heart has built a wall between itself and the very source meant for it. Remember the story of the prodigal son. He left home. He walked away. He sealed the doors of his heart with the confidence that he could stand on his own. When all his splendor slipped through his fingers like sand, he did not hear words of reproach from the Father. He only heard the emptiness inside himself. The inner house of his heart had been locked for so long that only remorse was strong enough to break the latch. And in that very moment, what he had always believed lost forever appeared before him, arms that had never closed. The Father had not been silent through all those days. It was the Son who had lived in a self-made silence, convinced he no longer deserved to hear the call home. When the door finally opened, it was not a new love that appeared. It was his heart that finally stopped locking it out. Hell makes you believe that silence is normal, that absence is safe, that a hardened heart is maturity. It is a house built from past wounds, distorted words, disappointments never laid down. And when you ask why I no longer knock, the truth is, I still do, but my knocking does not pierce the layers of walls raised by fear. I do not break the door, because I do not seize a soul. I remain outside, waiting for you to realize that being shut in has never protected you. It has only made you die slowly on the inside. I wait for the moment your hand reaches for the lock and turns it, even just a little, because as soon as there is a will to open, I will come in. It is not long prayers, not dramatic acts, not emotional outbursts that prove your heart is still alive. Sometimes it is just one brief pause in the middle of the rush, one caught breath when everything is too loud, one fleeting moment when you think, maybe I need something greater than myself. Those tiny openings are where grace enters. I do not look for perfect souls to knock on. I look for souls that know they are lacking. When you are no longer sure, when you are tired, when you feel helplessness slipping into your heart, that is precisely when the knocking becomes clearer, not in sound, but in the sense that something is waiting to be opened. I do not give up because you are silent. I simply wait for that fragile moment when will is tired, but hope is not yet dead. There are times you think spiritual longing must be a great, blazing, powerful fire, but grace does not require that. I only need a coal that is still breathing, a faint streak of light that has not gone out. When you are afraid you have kept the door closed for too long, remember that the remaining desire itself is the key in your hand. Souls that have sunk into numbness do not ask questions. They are not surprised when they do not pray, do not feel any lack when they do not sense me. But if you still feel uneasy, still sense that the silence is making your soul thirsty, that is the sign you have not lost yourself. A heart that knows it is dry still has the chance to sprout. I do not knock on the door of the proud. I knock on the door of the one who feels they are not enough, because that very not enough is what opens the way for me to enter. You may not know how to name your uneasiness. It is not sin, not failure, not weakness. It is simply the whisper of a soul recognizing it was born to be nourished. When you sit in the late night and ask, "Why is everything inside me so silent?" I am already present in that question. When you no longer find joy in the things that once excited you, I am in that emptiness. When you feel tired but do not know what you are tired from, I am in that trembling beat of your heart. Grace does not knock on doors flung wide open. Grace knocks where there is just enough of a crack so that you still must choose, so that you are still the one who turns the key, so that you never forget that true love never forces its way in. A potter looks at the cracks in a vessel not in order to throw it away, but to know where it needs to be touched. I look at your fissures in the same way. The questions in the silence, the tears no one knows about, the moments you pause in the middle of your work, all of these are cracks through which my light can slip in. Even if you think you have shut the door, your heart is not completely closed as long as there is one point of pain that makes you stop in your tracks. That is where I will place my finger, not to make you tremble, but to remind you that I have never left. As long as you do not reject that inner questioning, the knocking will continue. For grace does not measure your strength. It only looks for a sign that you still want to live. Grace does not know discouragement. It does not grow weary from knocking too many times, does not collapse when the heart refuses, does not look at your stumbles in order to decide to stop. You tire after a few disappointments. You lose heart after a few unanswered prayers. You shut down when your pride is wounded. But grace is different. It does not demand that you be worthy, nor does it keep a ledger of the times you ignored it. I do not come to you with shifting emotions as you do. I come with a steadfastness that stands outside of time. Grace is a spring that does not run dry, but your soul can turn it into a desert if you refuse to drink. The weariness you feel is not my weariness. It is the weariness of a heart that has grown accustomed to protecting itself by closing down. There are souls that once opened their doors, once burned bright, once knew how to receive me. But over time they built walls to avoid further hurt. They call it maturity, reason, prudence in life. But in truth it is simply the gradual callousing of the inner sensitive place. Just as a wound exposed too long to dirt will form a hard scab, your heart, exposed too long to doubt, will form a shell that blocks even what is good. I keep knocking, but the sound no longer goes deep within, not because I am knocking more softly, but because you have learned to mute anything that stirs the soul. That cautiousness does not protect you from disappointment, it only protects you from being moved, and when you are no longer moved, you gradually lose the ability to recognize me. I have seen you once stirred by prayer, waking in the night because of an invisible urge, wanting to say something honest to me and then swallowing it back out of fear you would not be answered. I know the moment you began to put toughness on as armor, as though a cold composure could shield you from pain. But that armor does not only block the arrows from outside, it also blocks the light from within. Grace does not shatter when it is rejected, but the human person slowly breaks when they reject it for too long. It is not that I grow tired of knocking, it is that you grow tired of listening. And each time you convince yourself, I do not need this anymore, another stone is laid across the entrance to your heart. One day, when people have grown accustomed to silence, they begin to mistake it for safety. They think that hearing nothing means peace. Like someone living by the shore who has grown used to the sound of the waves and believes they can sleep even as the water rises. But silence is never neutral. It is either rest while the heart remains open, or it is the sign of a soul that no longer wants to respond. Like an instrument that is never played, gradually loses its tone. A soul that is not nourished gradually loses its capacity to resound. I am still there, patient. But the tiny refusals of each day build into a wall large enough that you no longer hear the knocking, even though I remain at the door, not abandoning you for even a moment. Grace does not grow tired. What is exhausted is your soul as it strains to deny what it was born to receive. It is not that I withdraw, it is that the heart has learned to evade everything that calls it home. And when that avoidance becomes habit, you will believe that I am distant, while I am in fact standing just outside, waiting for a small act of courage as thin as a single breath for you to open the door once more. There are late afternoons when the light lingers long, when the sun seems to stay for a few extra minutes to give the earth its final gift of brightness. People can stand at the window, watching the orange hue wash over rooftops, streets, and branches, and believe that the sunset will last forever. But no matter how beautiful it is, the light will reach its limit and then withdraw, not because it is unjust, but because the nature of that moment is change. Grace is the same. It is patient, gentle, enduring far beyond what you imagine. But it is not so limitless that you can treat it as something to be taken for granted. A soul may delay for a long time, may stay silent again and again, may refuse time after time. But there will come a moment when delay is no longer a choice, but a habit that wears away desire. Today is the day of salvation, is not a threat about tomorrow. It is a reminder that the light is here. In the very moment you can still see it. Grace does not force you to run, nor does it drag you by sheer power. It is like the violet of the sky when the sun is nothing but a line on the horizon bright enough to awaken you, yet fragile enough for you to know that if you keep busy with other things, you will miss it. I do not want you to become someone who runs out of fear of losing. I want you to recognize that life stands before you. Your heart often comforts itself, saying, "Tomorrow I will open the door. Later I will pray. When life is calmer, I will return." But such promises are like standing before the sunset and thinking, "This light will never fade." When you turn away, busying yourself with things you believe are more urgent, you will turn back to find only darkness spread over the rooftops. Not because I took the light away from you, but because you turned your back for so long that you did not notice it was fading. There are souls who believe that grace can always wait, that I will always stand there and clear the way whenever they decide to return. This is true until the soul becomes so accustomed to absence that it no longer seeks. The time of grace is not measured by the hands of a clock, but by the condition of the heart. I may call you 1,000 times, but if the heart has grown so hardened that the knocking can no longer pass through, then delay has become a wall. And a wall is not built in a single moment. It grows through every time you say, "Not now. Not me." It doesn't matter. Just as the sky does not turn to night because of a single cloud, but because layer upon layer of dusk is replaced by darkness. Do not confuse my patience with the soul's indifference. I am not in a hurry, but I do not endorse the postponement that causes you to lose yourself. You think you are controlling time, but in truth, time is reweaving your heart. Every today you ignore is a thread pulled from the fabric of your life, until your soul no longer recognizes the design I wove into it at the beginning. I do not want to make you regret. I want you to realize that the present moment itself is the door. No one steps into the light in some vague future. All encounter with me happens in today. In the moment you dare to admit that silence has dried out your soul. Twilight does not blame the one who lingers, but it does not wait. Grace does not judge you for closing the door, but it cannot rescue the soul that has learned to refuse every stirring. When you feel your heart tremble even slightly at something good, understand that this is the moment when a soft thought brushes your mind for no clear reason. That is an invitation. When you sense in your weariness a need for refuge. That is a knock. Do not let the world distract you with its promises of later. Light can only be received in the present. Understand this: grace has never abandoned you. But a heart that refuses to answer long enough will lose the ability to recognize its call. Some souls believe that to return to me, they must offer polished prayers, complex rituals, long explanations for every mistake in their life. They stand before the door of grace in fear to open it, hearing in their minds the refrain, "I am not ready. I am not good enough. I am unworthy." But grace has never asked for such things. It does not ask how many reasons you can bring. It does not ask you to prove moral purity. It does not ask you to explain why you were silent for so long. Grace asks only for what every soul possesses: a sincere whisper. A single sigh is enough to crack the stone around the heart. I need you. That sound is so small it may echo only inside the mind, but it is enough to create a fissure, and the light will slip through it. There will be moments when you cannot say anything more. All your strength has been spent surviving long days, wearing a smile before others while your heart is hollow. When you stand before exhaustion with no words left, that is when the truest response appears. No longer memorized lines, no longer beautifully arranged prayers, but the breath of a soul that knows it has reached the end of itself. You do not need to explain to me why you are weak. I have seen every step you have taken. You do not need to recount why you shattered. I have watched every fragment fall. What I wait for is not a report, but the surrender of a heart that is honest enough to call me its refuge. You once believed that answering me required standing tall like the heroes in stories, that you must change your whole life before you could return. But spiritual truth beats to another rhythm. Healing begins, not with strength, but with listening. I do not ask you to run toward me in a heroic leap. I only want you to turn your face. A traveler lost in the forest does not need a full map. They only need to find the right direction. So it is with grace. You do not need to understand everything. You do not need to know what the future will hold. You do not need to see the whole path. You only need to be sincere enough to say, "I cannot walk on my own." From that moment, you are no longer alone. When you open the door, even just a narrow crack, I do not enter with thunder or storm. I enter with gentle presence. Like the first morning light slipping through the curtain, you will hear no applause or grand display, only an unfamiliar stillness settling over your soul, the very stillness you sought everywhere except in me. You will see that you are not a failure for being exhausted, but courageous for daring to admit, "I cannot hold myself up." I have waited for you, not to judge, but to sustain. I have been there in every moment of your pain, in every time you thought you could not go on, in every night you wept because no one understood, and the instant you utter those words, even as softly as a breath, I answer. Some ask, if you always knock, why must I respond? Why not simply enter? Because the soul was created for freedom, not invasion. I honor the door even when it is closed, because that door is your heart, and it belongs to me only when you open it from within. Love does not force. Grace does not break down the entrance. And so your response does not need to be dramatic, only true. A soul does not begin again with a shout, but with a quiet breath when it no longer wishes to pretend I need you. 4 simple words can change the direction of an entire life. A soul does not return through grand declarations or mighty vows. It returns through a very small movement, like the faint turn of a doorknob. Not yet enough to swing the door wide, but enough to let the hinge whisper. It is not an explosion, it is a shift. You think that answering me means changing your whole life in a single day, becoming a different person at once, tearing everything down to rebuild anew. But answering is actually a simple act. So easy, you once dismissed it. a deliberate moment of turning toward me. Do not underestimate it. Opening the door a little is not opening the whole house, but it allows the first beam of light to enter. And light, even in a thin sliver, will do what you cannot do yourself. It breaks the darkness. You may begin with things so simple they seem insignificant. Not long nights of prayer, not vows that from today I will live differently, but choosing a single moment in the day to be still, simply to let me be present. Like opening a small window in a room sealed for too long, the first breath of air may be strange, a little cold, carrying the scent of the earth outside. But that very change reminds the lungs that they once knew how to breathe deeply. You do not need to speak much in that moment. You only need to know that this time your silence is not abandonment, but listening. My response is not thunder, but gentleness, like the night breeze touching dry skin after a long, weary day. Some say I do not know how to pray. I do not have the words. I do not ask for a book. Begin with a breath, a simple phrase, a quiet call, please be here. When you do that, you are not only speaking to me, you are teaching your soul to remember that it has somewhere to return. Your heart may be so accustomed to busyness that silence unsettles you. Like a house, long locked, suddenly opened. But do not rush to close it again. Let the faint sounds of the outside world drift in, so you remember you are not imprisoned within the walls of your exhaustion. I do not need you to kneel solemnly each time. I only need you to choose not to turn away. There are changes that seem small but carry a weight beyond understanding. A please guide me instead of I must handle this alone. A tomorrow I will seek you, changing into today I will give you 1 minute. Eyes that once stared at life's disappointments, lifting to the sky. Even if that sky is nothing but gray clouds. That is turning the doorknob. That is cracking the window. Grace does not ask you to fling everything open. It only needs a single sliver of light to awaken the memory that you once lived with me. Once heard my voice. Once knew that peace was not something you had to fight to obtain. Those small acts will not make you better in the eyes of the world, but they will restore your soul's capacity to feel. Response is not the leap of a hero, but the step of one who returns. When you give me even a single moment that is truly mine, you are breaking a habit that quietly nourishes darkness, the habit of believing you are enough on your own. 1 minute given to me may seem like a grain of salt dropped into water. No one else will notice anything has changed, but that invisible change will alter the flavor of the entire stream. You will not see it on the first day, but your soul will feel it. It will tremble lightly, like the walls of a house after the first gust of wind, and little by little it will begin to remember my voice. There are rooms that are not dark because they are surrounded by night, but because the curtains have not been drawn for far too long. No one needs to break the walls or shatter the ceiling, only a hand that takes hold of the curtain and pulls it gently to one side. Light does not rush in like a storm. It enters according to its nature, soft, quiet, yet strong enough to restore color to everything in the room. So it is with your soul. The hell within you does not vanish because you shout spiritual declarations, nor because you decide to change your life. It begins to fade from the moment you speak your first word to me after a long silence. Not a perfect prayer, simply the act of speaking, like calling the name of a friend who has been waiting outside your door for a long time. Please stay here. And I do not answer with thunder, but with presence, the presence your heart has forgotten how to recognize. Some people think the inner hell is a fierce battle between the soul and dark forces, that deliverance must come amid shouting and miracles. But in reality, it often dissolves in the moment you stop talking to yourself and begin talking to me. A simple plea can loosen the wall you have spent years building. When you utter that call, I respond not as one who judges you, but as the source of life finding the place it belongs. You once believed you needed to explain every wound, every failure, every reason you turned away. But I have already seen it all. I do not need your defense. I need your openness. When you call to me, I respond not with reasoning, but by dwelling in the deepest spaces within you. That presence is unlike human emotion. It is not rushed, not loud, not waving its arms to catch attention. It is like light gradually filling a room at first, just a stripe on the floor. Then a moment later you notice the curve of the chair, the hue of the table, the reflection on the surface of the glass. The world within you awakens the same way. Hope returns not with trumpet blasts, but when you realize you are no longer afraid of mourning. Peace returns not as a great miracle, but when you notice yourself breathing more deeply. I do not need to change everything in your life overnight. I simply enter enough for you to know you are no longer alone. When you begin to speak to me, your words may be scattered, trembling, perhaps nothing more than a whisper. But I do not listen with ears, I listen with the heart. No prayer is too small for me to ignore. A cry spoken through fragile tears moves heaven more than polished speeches spoken in pride. The souls who think themselves farthest from me are often the ones closest, because they are the ones for whom a simple "help me" makes the sky within begin to shift. You may not feel it immediately, but like the faint glow of dawn, once it appears, darkness has already begun to lose. Do not wait until you are completely strong to speak to me. The very act of speaking in weakness is proof of life. You do not need to wait for your heart to be calm before returning to me. I am the source of that calm. You do not need to search for the right words before you pray. I am the one who understands even what you cannot articulate. Responding to me is not a gesture of the triumphant, it is the gesture of one who longs to be saved. When you begin speaking to me again, the inner hell loses its foundation. Because hell is not a place I lock you in, it is the place the soul locks itself when it stops conversing with the one who created it. A soul does not awaken in a sudden burst of brilliance, but through very subtle movements, like someone who has lived a long time in darkness, beginning to recognize light by sensing the slightest change in the air. It does not need a shout from the heavens, nor blazing miracles, only a gentle touch from me, sometimes a fleeting thought that makes you pause, sometimes a peace without reason in the midst of a stressful day, sometimes the realization that it has been far too long since you last spoke with me. An awakened soul does not treat such things as coincidence, it treats them as signals. It does not let them pass through like clouds gliding overhead, but holds them close as one remembers the footsteps of a loved one drawing near the door of the home. There are people who always wait for a grand miracle to believe that I am calling them. They want something extraordinary, something astonishing, something that terrifies all who witness it. But the awakened soul understands that miracles rarely arrive in spectacle. I do not need to shake the mountain for you to know I have come. I only need to gently stir the heart you believed had hardened. Like the first drop of rain falling onto the soil after a long drought, not enough to flood the fields, but enough to awaken the scent of earth. The awakened soul recognizes life in the smallest signs. It does not demand that I shout, because it has already heard me in every breath. Before the soul awakens, you would casually overlook the smallest invitations, a verse of scripture that crossed your eyes without imprinting itself, a hymn rushed through on the way to work, a story someone shared that you only smiled at before moving on. But when the soul begins to awaken, these small things suddenly gain weight. You will read a very short line, and your heart will tremble as though it has received a letter written to it. You will see someone in pain, not with judgment, but with recognition that you too once needed rescue. You will hear someone ask, "Are you okay?" and feel that I am speaking through the lips of an ordinary person. An awakened soul does not search for me in grand sermons. It sees me quietly walking in the footsteps of everyday life. The difference is not in the world outside, but in the inner capacity to see. Like a musician who can detect a shift in only a few measures, the awakened soul can sense me in what others overlook. It no longer demands evidence, no longer requires me to prove myself. It knows that grace does not need thunder to be grace. A gentle warmth in a cold afternoon breeze. A thought that stops you from speaking harm. A hesitation in your heart when you turn toward an old path. This is me reaching out to you. Not to warn you with fear, but to say, I am still here. Listen. An awakened soul understands that recognizing the knock does not mean it understands everything. It only knows that it no longer wants to ignore it. It no longer looks at the flame within and says, that is just emotion, but places its hand upon its chest and asks, did you just call me? When you live in that awareness, you will no longer wait for life-changing events before calling my name. You will invite me to step in at the heart of the smallest moments. You will not say, when I am at peace, I will seek you, but whisper, in this chaos, please be here. And that is the turning point, not when you find the light, but when you stop pretending that darkness is normal. There are seasons when you walk without feeling anything clearly, like someone moving through a room lit only by a dim lamp. There is no burst of illumination, no overwhelming emotion, only small steps in a silent space. Yet it is in such moments that a heart familiar with my presence will not be afraid. It does not need to see me to believe. It does not need signs to stand firm. It is like a child holding its father's hand in the dark. It cannot see the face. It hears no explanation. Yet the warmth of the hand is enough to know it is not abandoned. A soul accustomed to me is the same. It does not panic when emotions shift, does not tremble when the inner sky becomes hazy, because it knows that I do not vanish simply because you cannot feel me. When a heart has lived long enough in the light, it will understand that darkness has no authority to define my presence. There are long nights when you hear nothing from me, but that does not mean I am silent. There are moments when you pray and believe the wind has carried off your words, but those words have never escaped my attention. As the ancient poet once said, even in the darkness, you are there. That idea is not merely comfort, but the truth that enables you to remain standing. A heart that has once recognized me will no longer be deceived by passing emotions. It knows that emotion is a curtain constantly shifting, while I am the foundation. And when you understand this, presence no longer depends on mood, but becomes the breath of the soul, quiet, yet undeniable. Even when you pass through barren seasons, when your prayers seem unable to break through the wall before you, the heart familiar with me does not rush to conclude that I am distant. It has learned that some lessons can only mature in silence, that certain truths can only be grasped when you stop clutching everything and allow me to lead step by step. It knows that I may be nearest when you believe yourself most lost, for my presence has never depended on your clarity, but on my faithfulness. A soul living in that awareness no longer panics when night falls. It understands that the night does not take it from my sight, nor loosen my grip upon you. And from within that stillness, you will see that darkness is no longer a threat, but merely a setting in which trust is refined. You do not need to understand everything to take another step. You do not need to guess tomorrow in order to stand firm today. Like a child who only needs to know the hand holding them is real, the soul familiar with me only needs to know that I have promised never to abandon you, and that promise is stronger than any feeling. When you walk with that quiet trust, darkness loses its power to disturb, because it cannot separate you from what your soul already knows. I am there in the light, in the night, in the silence, and in every heartbeat. You will realize that fear never came from the darkness, but from briefly forgetting whose hand you are holding. But when you remember, even if only in a single breath, peace returns, like calm waters after a gentle wind. The darkness does not disappear instantly, but its authority dissolves, because it no longer has permission to define you. You walk not because you see clearly, but because you are led. You stand not because everything is illuminated, but because you belong to the one who does not change. And to live this way, you do not need many things. You only need a heart that continues to recognize that quiet presence, even when you cannot feel it. You are still held. There will come a day when your soul has passed through enough dry seasons, enough long nights when you believed I had vanished, that you will suddenly grasp a truth no longer frightening but deeply moving. Hell has never been a punishment I designed for you. It is simply the inner world of a heart that has lived too long without opening its door to me. It does not arrive through an eruption, nor by terrifying screams, but forms as you grow accustomed to fighting alone, accustomed to the feeling of not needing me, like one lost in the ocean who believes they can still swim on their own, even while the lifeboat has always been beside them, within arm's reach. You are not forced to climb aboard, yet the waves keep pressing you down, until the heart becomes tired enough to understand that reaching out is not failure, but return. Many lives have been lived this way. They wander through the world with a rain-soaked map shoved into their pocket, never opened. They walk by experience, by instinct, by their own wisdom, and each time they take a wrong turn, they blame the road, the weather, fate, but never the fact that they refuse to look at the map. They think I hid the directions, but the truth is the map has always been in their hands, simply forgotten at the bottom of the pocket. Grace operates that way, not forceful, not snatching your hand, simply waiting for the moment you choose to unfold it. I have knocked on the door of their hearts in countless ways through a quiet afternoon, through the casual words of a stranger, through a moment of stumbling that forced them to pause in the rhythm of life. But if the door does not open, I do not break in, for love does not cross thresholds with violence. Then one day, when they are exhausted, when the sea has taught them that endless swimming on their own is futile, they finally see the lifeboat still there, not gone, not condemning, not keeping a record of failure, just waiting for their touch. That realization does not arrive with thunder, but with the breath of a weary soul. I cannot do this alone anymore. In that moment, hell begins to dissolve. Because hell was never a gate I locked to imprison them, but a door they themselves bolted shut out of fear of facing the light. That door does not open through great philosophy, but through a simple act turning the handle. Every knock they ignored has been the roadmap of redemption, not to frighten them, but to tell them that I have not left, have not disappeared, have not stopped loving. When you understand this, you will stop seeing me as one who wields a hammer of judgment, and begin to recognize me as the one who rose beside you, steadily, throughout the journey. You will see that the years you thought were wasted were actually a series of signals. I sent the encounters you thought accidental, the sudden ache you could not explain, the nights you awoke in silence, not to punish you, but to remind you that the door still exists, the boat still exists, the map still exists, and I am patiently waiting for you to return. No one is dragged into the light by force. Light is an invitation. Hell is not the destination I choose for you, it is the place I continually seek to pull you from. Sometimes with strong touches, but most often with small knocks only a listening heart can recognize. In the end, when your eyes learn to see beyond fear, you will realize that grace does not only save you from the fire, it saves you from absence itself, from living an entire life without knowing you are loved. You will understand why I do not force the door open, why I do not compel you to unlock it, because a love that is truly great always respects freedom, and because returning only has meaning when you choose to walk back on your own, and when your heart opens, even by a narrow crack, you will see that I was never far. I have simply been knocking softly, day after day, year after year, like a faithful companion who does not abandon you in the dark sea. There is a kind of maturity that unfolds within the soul when you realize that grace is not only for your most desperate days, but for the simplest rhythms of life. Many only come to me when the world collapses, when they lose the one they love, when their dreams break, when their heart aches so deeply they have nowhere left to run. They wait until the darkness consumes them before they knock upon my door, as though I am merely an emergency shelter. But one day, you will understand opening the door is not the action of a desperate person. It is the natural rhythm of a soul that knows it belongs to me. This closeness is formed through small habits. When you choose to speak with me before morning awakens, when you set down your phone to sit in silence for a minute, when you exhale and let me enter the space you used to fill with noise, not because you are weak, but because you have learned that true strength comes from companionship, not solitary pride. When you learn to open the door every day, your heart no longer recoils at every disturbance. You no longer wait until the water reaches your throat to extend your hand, because you are accustomed to swimming in the same current with me. Storms no longer incite panic, they only make you quiet enough to listen. This practice is not ritual or ceremony, but like drinking water when thirsty, breathing when tired. It is the natural movement of a soul that understands it was not born to live far from its source. You do not need elaborate prayers, sometimes a single breath, "Be with me," or a gentle reminder within, "I am here." That sincerity is what opens the heart each day, like an old wooden door that becomes less resistant, less creaking, because it has grown familiar with the hand of its returning master. The practice of opening the door is not about seeking supernatural experiences, but about recognizing presence in ordinary life. When you peel an apple and remember that I give breath to you, when you step outside and see the dim light spreading across the ground after the rain, when you hear the laughter of a child and feel hope entering you for no clear reason, each of these moments is a knock. You start to understand that grace does not pressure, does not demand, does not rush, it simply knocks and waits. When you respond through a sequence of small choices, choosing not to speak ill when it would be easy, forgiving when no one insists, choosing silence instead of retaliation, your soul expands without a revolution, not because you are trying to appear righteous, but because you have entered the light, and the light dismisses darkness naturally. One day you will look back and realize that the inner hell does not disappear through grand victories, but through steady, quiet decisions in which you let me move a little closer each day. The door of the heart does not open through the force of reason, but through the softness of habit, like a farmer patiently watering his plants every morning, not demanding blossoms, simply believing that life is unfolding beneath the soil. When you live this way, you will be surprised. The gray mist within your soul does not vanish through a sudden tempest, but through the return of light, through every crack in the door, every fold in the curtain, every corner of the room. Peace seeps in like water soaking into dry earth, silent, but unstoppable. By then, opening the door will no longer be a duty, but a joy. You will no longer ask, "Why must I pray?" but will say, "I want to meet you." You will not wait until pain arrives to seek me, but will come to me while the day is still bright. For a soul that learns to open the door every day does not only escape inner hell, it never returns to it. For instead of living to resist the darkness, it lives to walk in the light. True transformation begins when you no longer see me as the place you run to after every breakdown, but as the air you breathe in each small movement of life. When you shift from the act of opening the door to the state of living with me, what was once ritual becomes a natural rhythm. Like someone who has learned to swim no longer counts each stroke, but simply yields to the water and moves with the waves. Your soul will be the same. It no longer strains to remember that it must pray, must pause, must listen, It begins to do these things as a way of existing. Each day becomes a warm and gentle response rather than frantic petitions. When you realize that presence is not an emergency remedy, but a constant source of oxygen, emotions no longer dominate the heart, they become ripples, gliding across the surface, without ever touching the depths. Then, the rebalancing happens as softly as breath. You do not need to wind your spirit back up every time you falter, because you no longer build your strength upon personal effort, but upon a connection that has grown quietly within you. The question is no longer, do I pray or not, but the natural lifting of your head, the turning of your heart toward me, like a friend leaning into a familiar shoulder after a long day. A rebalanced soul no longer operates by crisis. Joy does not make it forget me. Sorrow does not drive it away. It learns to stand between extremes without being pulled apart, for it rests upon something beyond emotion, the presence of the one who does not change. Storms will still come, but instead of panicking for refuge, you simply adjust your breath and whisper, "You are here." Just as a great tree no longer trembles before gentle winds, your soul centered in me will no longer be torn apart by the noise of life. Criticism, disappointment, comparison, sudden praise, these become nothing more than sounds outside the window. You begin to experience peace not as a burst of emotion, but as the steady underground stream that nourishes the roots. This does not happen overnight, and it does not arrive through fleeting enthusiasm. It comes through each morning when you spend a few quiet minutes speaking with me, each afternoon when you turn off a meaningless conversation, each evening when you gently close your eyes and give thanks for having been preserved through the day. Each small act draws you out of a merely survival faith and into a life guided by communion. A rebalanced soul does not come to me to escape, but to step rightly. It does not wait for exhaustion to seek peace. It receives peace as part of companionship. And because of that, no moment ever becomes too much. What once would have driven you to the edge now simply makes you pause long enough to remember whose hand you are holding. When you live like this, the soil of your spirit becomes soft, able to sprout even while the wind still blows. And light does not need to break down walls to enter it, only needs the curtain to be drawn slightly. Day by day, if one day you look back and realize that you no longer have to try to feel me, that is a good sign you have moved from seeking to abiding, from asking for signs to living within them, from fear to trust. When presence becomes the rhythm of your life, you will see that prayer is no longer a burden, but a joy. Silence is no longer frightening, but a place of rest. And opening the door is no longer a reaction, but an instinct. The inner hell has no room to germinate, because the heart has found a refuge it no longer wishes to leave. And in that peace, you will understand that I never wanted you to run to me, only when you were breathless. I wanted you to live beneath the heaven I prepared from the first morning. Before you even knew what darkness meant, there comes a moment, once you have walked long enough in the rhythm of life with me, when presence ceases to be a cloak that protects you from the cold winds and becomes the very skin of your soul. You no longer come to me just to avoid the abyss, but to understand why you were placed in this world. Then meaning is no longer found in what you do, but in the one you walk with. Life ceases to be a long road to conquer and becomes a journey of companionship. From there, the soul no longer stops at merely not fearing hell. It begins to perceive that it is invited into a life of purpose, a life in which everything you do, every word you speak, every tenderness you offer to someone who is collapsing, becomes a way the light moves through you to reach another, not to boast, but to show that grace never knocked for the sake of a single soul. This has happened before to Simon Peter. He was not called while kneeling at an altar, nor chosen in a solemn ceremony. He was called while casting nets, weary and empty after a night of failure. My invitation came not in thunder, but in a simple sentence, "Follow me." And from that moment, my presence did not merely rescue him from the meaninglessness of a fruitless night, it redefined his life. He became not merely a fisherman, but a fisher of souls, not because he was capable, but because he learned how to open the door when the knocking came again. And again, failure ceased to be hell, it became the place where he discovered purpose. And when he became a guide for the lost, he did not do it by his own strength, but by the very light that saved him from the confused darkness of the night sea. There was another Mary Magdalene. The world named her by her faults, by her stains, by her past. She walked like a defeated one, living under the gaze of human judgment. But grace did not knock on her life with sermons. It came through a gaze that recognized who she was beyond her brokenness. When she heard me call her by name, it was not simply rescue from shame, but the moment she discovered her true nature. She was no longer the one defined by her past. She became the first witness of the resurrection. In that presence, she was not only protected from the hell called shame, she was entrusted with a mission to carry good news to hearts that had gone numb. From a shattered soul, she became the doorway through which the light stepped into the world. When you understand this, you will stop asking me, "How do I stop being afraid?" and begin asking, "What was I born to do in this light?" You will no longer tremble at the thought of darkness, because you will know you have not only escaped it, you have been invited to help others find the way out. You will no longer push me outside your life and then seek me when the storm comes. You will walk with me in every small decision, from how you comfort a friend to how you forgive someone who once wounded you. For then you will understand presence is not a shield to protect, but a river that nourishes every step. Hell ceases to be a threat, because hell only has power in hearts that are closed. But when the door has opened, the light does not merely enter, it begins to flow outward. That is the true awakening of a soul. No longer afraid of what it once avoided, no longer preoccupied with proving itself, no longer living to resist the darkness. You live to reflect the light. When you see someone who is lost, you do not judge, but recognize your own journey and theirs. When you see a heart silent before the knocking, you do not call them weak, you become patient, as grace once was patient with you. And in that moment you will see more clearly what I have always whispered. My presence does not merely keep you from falling, it writes upon your story so that you may become the hand that leads others out of a darkness they do not know has swallowed them. When a soul has learned to turn toward the light, it no longer lives only to protect its own peace. There comes a quiet but decisive moment you realize the light is not merely a refuge, but a current that wants to flow through you. You begin to see the world with different eyes, not as a landscape full of threats that must be defended against, but as a place with weary hearts like the one you once carried. You no longer clutch the light as though guarding a rare treasure, but lift it like a lantern in the night, bright enough for the lost to see and draw near. Sharing the light does not require you to become extraordinary. It only requires that you do not close. When a soul has opened its door, it naturally becomes a door for those beside it, not through preaching, but through a presence that does not rush, through a gaze free of judgment, through small gestures of kindness that are sincere. There are people around you who are too tired to knock. They once tried once or many times, but no longer have the strength to believe again. Their light did not fade out of malice, but from exhaustion. What they need is not someone shouting in their darkness, but someone placing a small lamp at the edge of the road. When you know you are sustained by presence, you do not try to redesign people, nor press them into your own mold. You simply remain like a flickering but faithful lamp, so they know there is still a safe place in this world. Wounded souls do not need reasons, demands, or lists of requirements. They need to feel that a door is still open somewhere. And you, though you think yourself very ordinary, Become the living evidence that grace is at work, not through dazzling miracles, but through the quiet transformation of the way you love. To spread the light is not to stand on a high stage proclaiming it, but to live gently among others. You will see presence guiding you to pause when someone needs a simple question like, "Are you okay?" or to remain silent instead of provoking a useless argument. The light reveals itself through every small action, like raindrops falling unnoticed on dry soil, softening it for seeds to take root. When you share the light, you lose nothing instead. The light grows within you, for light is made to flow, not to be stored in a sealed container. The more you walk in the light, the more naturally you become a refuge for worn-out souls. This spreading is not forced, and it does not carry the sense of saving people. It is like someone who has found the way home and cannot bear to watch others wander forever. There will be moments when you are surprised. A small action you make in peace, a word of encouragement, a warm glance. A single time you refuse to let a bitter remark escape, your lips becomes a lifeline for someone. They may never tell you, may never stand before you to say thank you, but their soul will remember. Light does not need to be thanked in order to keep spreading. It only needs hands willing to receive and pass it on. And when you live with that spirit, you no longer ask, "Am I enough?" but instead, "How can I become a place where someone feels safe to pause and rest?" That humility is the sign of a soul that has stepped beyond the stage of desperately saving itself and entered the season of nourishing others. Spreading the light is not about changing the whole world at once, but about making sure one heart is not left abandoned in the darkness of its own inner world. No one is too small to carry light. No one is too weary to become a shelter for a thread of hope. When your soul has learned to live with my presence, true peace is no longer about outrunning the darkness, but about refusing to let others fight alone. And that is how the light I give you does more than save you from hell. It begins to rescue souls you may never meet in this life. One person at a time, one moment at a time. When the light is no longer a private experience, but becomes the rhythm of your life, its reach extends beyond the borders of a single person. You are no longer merely the keeper of your own flame, but almost without realizing it, you become a coal that warms an entire house. This does not happen through grand appeals or glittering slogans, but through a quiet presence in the midst of everyday life, in your workplace, in your family, among your friends. You do not need to declare that you have been changed. You only need to do everything without haste, without harshness, without rushing to judge. When you can remain calm in the middle of chaos, others will begin to wonder why. When you can listen before you answer, others will begin to sense that they are safe. The light in you never storms into another person's life like a tempest. It enters like a gentle breeze that makes them want to open their window. A community is not transformed by shouted slogans, but by one person who dares to live differently. The first sprout is always silent. A soul that has learned to open the door every day will naturally become a quiet rhythm within the group. It does not compete for roles. Yet, it is the one whose presence makes everyone want to soften. It does not flaunt its wisdom. Yet it is the one people seek out in times of trouble. It does not need to prove itself. Yet it always seems to be there when sorrow needs a hand. It does not just talk about the light. It becomes light. And then, in that atmosphere, the hearts around it begin to learn how to breathe without envy, without jealousy, without chasing meaningless noise, not because you preach to them, but because they have seen that peace is real. The life of a community takes root through gestures so small the world calls them meaningless. Someone sets a glass of water on the desk of a colleague who is overwhelmed. Someone spends 2 extra minutes listening instead of cutting another off. Someone chooses silence even when they know they could win the argument. These things are like raindrops falling on the dry ground of humanity. No one notices each drop, but over time, the soil softens. One day, A person who has lived long in drought will say to another, "Today I feel more at peace." They do not realize that this peace has come from your quiet presence, from the way you let the light flow through you. That is how a community is healed, not by moral pressure, but by a living witness of gentleness. When light spreads within a group, it does not place you at the center. The wonder is this: the more you allow me to work through you, the more you fade into the background like a shadow. You no longer need to be honored for living well. You do not stand up and say, "Follow me." You simply live, and your life itself becomes an invitation. Weary hearts will notice this is a place where the soul is not suffocated. Those who are used to competition will feel something strange here. I do not have to pretend. Those who once trembled to speak the truth will realize, here, my voice is not condemned. And within that holy strangeness, light quietly overcomes darkness, not through triumph, but through safety, not through philosophy, but through love. This is how true communities are built. No one fights for power, yet everyone knows how to connect. No one strives to prove themselves right, yet everyone honors the truth. No one forces another to believe, yet everyone understands that believing becomes natural when the heart is allowed to breathe. A community like this does not need a long set of rules in order to survive. It lives because there are souls who have learned how to open the door to the light. And when light dwells among many, collective hell, that which is born from apathy and fear, begins to fade. A suffocating room finds an exit simply because someone has drawn the curtain back a little. No one has to shout. There only needs to be enough light for one soul to say, "Here, I can begin again." There will be moments no one else notices, but you will feel them when your heartbeat slows in the middle of the noisy day, when a brief thought rises like a thin ray of light, when something inside you is not loud, yet still strong enough to make you stop. These moments do not come to demand, do not come to accuse, but arrive like a gentle breath, like a hand resting on your shoulder without tightening its grip. This is the knock of grace, sent not with thunder, but with the patience of one who has never left. Some will feel afraid at the thought of returning, because they are convinced that I will ask how long they have been lost, what wrongs they have done, how many chances they have wasted. But the truth is, I do not ask those questions. I ask only, are you willing to open the door now? The past is not a condition. Wounds are not crimes. Weariness is not failure. They are simply pieces of your story that prove you are still alive, still capable of pain, still reaching for something greater than yourself. Do not force yourself to be put together before coming back. Come as you are right now. If you are trembling, then tremble in my arms. If you are confused, be confused and still walk toward the light. If you are exhausted, lay that exhaustion in my hands. You do not need to bring reasons. Do not need to prepare a speech. Do not need to rearrange your face. I have seen you in your darkest places, and I have never turned away. I do not call you so that I can turn you into a hero. I call you so that you may rest, may breathe, may return to the very rhythm I placed in your soul from the beginning. When you learn to listen to the knock, you will discover that grace has never been withdrawn. It does not come because you are worthy. It comes because I chose to love you long before you knew my name. It does not come to test your strength, but to remind you that true strength is not found in bracing yourself alone, but in learning how to lean on me. There will be days when you feel that nothing has changed. You open the door, yet life is still full of dust. You pray, yet your heart still carries its scars. You sit in silence, yet your mind remains tangled. But it is precisely in those days that grace does its work, not with force, not with brilliance, but like water seeping into the smallest cracks of stone, turning them into places where grass can grow. Change does not always come like lightning. Sometimes it arrives like a faint warmth at the tips of your fingers in winter. Let the end of this message be a whisper rather than a command. Do not let your heart become accustomed to absence. Keep within it a small space no more than a breath, a sigh, a whispered word, a lifted gaze, and that small space will be enough for grace to enter. You do not need to see the whole road. You only need to keep the door unlocked. For if you open it even slightly, the light will find the rest. And if one day you feel you do not know what to do not know how to stand up again, do not know whether you are still worthy, remember that I never ask you to prove anything. I only ask, do you hear my knocking? If you hear it, even once, do not remain silent. Now pray like this: Lord, help me recognize that silence before your knocking is not just delay, but that I am slowly losing the sense of life that only you can give. Let my heart tremble when you come to me in the smallest things, so that I do not mistake normality as enough to live, forgetting the true source of life. Lord, when my soul wants to close itself because of exhaustion, help me remember that peace does not come from avoiding you, but from opening the door for you to enter. Free me from the false confidence that I can endure on my own, for it is in weakness that I learn to rely on you. Lord, grant me ears that hear your voice through what seems insignificant, a quiet moment, a gentle word from a stranger, an old memory that stirs my heart. Do not let me despise these small signs, for many souls have lost you simply because they waited for thunder rather than a gentle knock. Lord, when I want to chase emotion instead of truth, pull me back, for emotions change with every breeze, but your truth stands firm through every age. Teach me to distinguish between fleeting fear and the loving urging you place deep within the soul. Lord, there are times when I think I do not oppose you, only that I simply do not respond. Help me understand that silence is also a choice, and that choice may accustom my heart to your absence until I no longer recognize that you once stood so near. Lord, free me from using success as spiritual anesthesia, for there are souls who achieve everything they desire, yet weep in secret at night. Let me know that you do not call me to gain everything, but to learn how to live in love. Lord, when the world sings promises of happiness, help me not chase them like a thirsty one, frantic for salt water. Let me remember that peace does not come from filling the void, but from letting you become the dwelling place within my heart. Lord, save me from the illusion that distance from you will give me freedom. Let me remember that freedom is not to be led by no one, but to be led by the one who knew me from my mother's womb. Do not let me fall into loneliness disguised as busyness. Lord, when I blame life for the storms, make me look back at the boat of my soul and see that I lowered the sails and let the wind carry me away. Help me stand again and remember that you have never abandoned me at sea, only waited for me to take the hand already extended. Lord, guard me from treating indifference as harmless. Help me see that every time I ignore you, my heart is losing its ability to tremble before what is holy. Do not let my soul become an empty place simply because I have grown accustomed to not opening the door when you knock. Lord, when I am weary and believe that silence is safety, remind me that true safety lies not in avoidance, but in response. Help me understand that you do not force me, but that every knock carries love. And if I do not answer, I will be the first to lose my peace. I offer this prayer in the holy name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so that together we may build a strong community of faith.